Please let me welcome Friederike Rook from Convenus. Convenus is a long-term partner of ECA Italia on global mobility matters and support us and clients of ours in the management of immigration, tax and social security for Italian expats to Switzerland. So the aim of this country focus is an overview, a country overview on immigration, of course, and on coronavirus and epidemic impacts and consequences on the expat management in Switzerland. So Friederike will give us also an analysis of the main tax and social security issues affecting expatriates. So just a couple of tips and rules for today's webinar. Friederike's speech would be on immigration. After the immigration part, the participants could bring some questions, so we will have some minutes to forward a question to Friederike and to us. And then we will have the tax and then the social security part. After that, we will have also another Q&A time. So please mute your microphones for all participants, so we'll have no noises or rumors during the speech. And so please, Friederike, go on with your focus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martina, and welcome from my side. I will try now to in the next 60 minutes, provide you an overview about the Swiss immigration rules. And then after the quick break about the social security implications and tax implications for expats coming to Switzerland. And the last couple of minutes, I will tell you about our situation here in Switzerland, about the COVID-19 situation. We are almost all more or less back in the office. Still people working from home, but almost everybody else is at least allowed to go to the office and use everything as before the COVID-19 situation. So let's start. If we look at today and think about the immigration as well as tax and social security aspects about assignments, this is not the only thing we have to look at. There are a couple of other things we have to look at as well in regard to assignments. However, we're not touching these topics like labor law, compensation, and the processes today. So we only now look at the three aspects: tax, social security, and immigration, which is already quite complex. And this overview shall show you why it is so complex. Because assignments is not just the ones you may think the first, like long-term assignments, assignments for 1 to 5 years or even longer. It is also meant someone coming over to Switzerland for a couple of days or working on a construction site for several weeks, or just commuting for a couple of months, or a short-term assignment for 3 to 12 months. And if you see just about the period assignments can take, you will also see in the end that there are then different immigration or different work permit types we have to look at, as well as from the tax and social security side, there are also different aspects to look at. And the period part is one of the things we have to look at. What we also have to always look at and consider is how someone is actually employed and where is the employer situated. So the employment contract situation plays in regard to the immigration as well as social security and tax situation plays a huge role in that. So the period and the tax liability and the employment contract is quite crucial. If we look now at the Swiss immigration, before we start about the different types of work permits, you may know that Switzerland has 26 cantons, which also then means we do have 26 different processes and procedures. For our country, which is very, very small, it is something we have to consider on a daily basis. And we not only have these different processes and procedures, we also are sometimes struggling with having 3 languages. So if we file an application in Canton Ticino, everything has to be in Italian. If we file the same kind of application, same work permit type in Zurich, for example, we do have to file everything in German. And if we go to the French-speaking part of Switzerland, everything has to be in French. Now, because of the independency of our cantons, they also have set up different processes, as said. And the processes, this is something you or everybody has to really consider in the end, because an application we file in Zurich will be, for example, reviewed on a daily basis by the labor market official. If we file the same type of work permit, for example, in Geneva, then only once a week the applications will be reviewed and discussed in a team, and only afterwards we will receive then the approvals. In Canton Ticino, there's even a meeting which takes place every month only, so that also shows you that the processes are different. And sometimes then an application in Zurich is quite quickly done, and in other cantons it just takes longer based on the way they deal with it. Also, in some cantons, we still have to file everything by mail. There's nothing we can do with kind of online submission. Only cantons like, for example, Zurich, Basel, and St. Gallen have actually an online platform where we can file those applications online. What you also have to know about the Swiss immigration is we do have different types of work permits, and we will look at a slide in a second about the different types. We need to look really at whether somebody is local employed or on assignment. There's a huge difference between that. We also have something, because our, and that is not a joke, our unemployment rate is increasing. Now, if we compare our unemployment rate with other countries, then we are very, very lucky. Still, because of the unemployment rates in different categories, there is a new law that if you want to hire a non-EU EFTA national, you first have to, for 5 days, post the open role with the unemployment authority only, and only afterwards you are allowed to publish it on your own website as well as everywhere else. However, that is something very specific and only is linked to local employment. For assignments, we also have a new law since last year, which is in the integration requirement of non-EU EFTA national spouses of non-EU EFTA nationals. This is something which comes into place for assignments longer than 2 years. Those spouses need to be integrated, and we will look in a moment then as well what that means. We still have work permit quotas for a couple of permits, and we also look at the next slide where those work permit quotas are. In practice, with companies sending people just for a couple of days or a couple of weeks to Switzerland, we usually have then the question whether a work permit is really required or not. And there comes then the question about what is meant as working. So the definition of employment is quite crucial in that regard. And it refers basically to, in case somebody comes here to Switzerland on a meeting basis, whether that meeting is in the end really viewed as work and therefore a work permit is required, or the meeting is viewed as not working and therefore no work permit is required. In case there is a work permit required, we do have an exception rule of 8 days, and we will look at that in a second. What I would like to point out in today's session is the thing about the Swiss equivalent salary and the mandatory labor law conditions, because they are quite important and the authority are increasingly looking and reviewing those. As well as I would like to say a couple of words about the increasing number of labor market controls, as well as about the situation of night, Saturday and Sunday permits. And a couple of words as well about Schengen Visa, which is only for non-EU EFTA nationals, so not for an Italian necessary. However, if you have, for example, an American living in Italy and sending him to Switzerland, then for him a Schengen visa may need be requested. This is the overview I just spoke about of the different work and residence permits. We have put on that slide as well as the part about the local employment as well as the assignment. Now we will focus today completely on the assignment part. Only I will say a couple of words about the cross-border permit, because that is something we quite often have from Italians living in Italy and then coming to work in Switzerland and looking at the cross-border permit regulation. However, the main focus will be really on the online notification and the 120 days work permit based on assignment. This is something which is not subject to quota and which is therefore quite often used for people working here on a project, maybe a couple of weeks or a couple of days only. That is these two work permit types are in the focus there. And then short-term permits as well as long-term permits, and those are then subject to quota. To give you an idea what the quotas mean, or here's an overview. We have, and there we also do not make our life very easy. We have quotas for non-EU EFTA nationals. Those quotas are issued once a year and then are splitted over the different cantons. And there you can see, if you look for a resident permit B in Canton Ticino, they will see there's only 58, basically 58 permits Canton Ticino can issue in 2020 for non-EU EFTA nationals. So the number is not very high. For Croatians, which are still, from a Swiss immigration perspective, still not completely integrated in the agreement of free movement, we have a separate quota, which is issued or released every year and then spread in 4 quarterly releases. What we need to look at is about the second part, the quotas for EU EFTA nationals. We have quotas, and that is only now for L and B permits. And if somebody, for example, the Italian person taking up a local employment here in Switzerland with a local contract, a Swiss company, no quotas. The person can just come to Switzerland, register here, and starts to work. However, if somebody remains employed abroad, being assigned to Switzerland, we do have those quotas in place. For us, at least for 2020, the UK still belongs to the EU-EFTA part. In starting next year, most likely, there's still a discussion with the Swiss government and the UK government to see whether they find an agreement for a further transition period. However, up to now, I think nobody knows really what will happen with the UK. As said, the definition of employment is important in order to see whether a work permit is required or not. And the State Secretary for Migration has announced a leaflet about it and a definition, what is meant as employment and what is not. And basically, if somebody is just participating in a training and really passively sitting there, then no work permit is required because it's not viewed as employment. For example, if somebody is coming from Italy, employed with an Italian company, coming here to negotiate a contract with the client, then this is also not viewed as employment and no work permit is required. However, if at the same meeting, the person is in the morning negotiating the contract and in the afternoon already starting to work on the project, then that day is viewed as working, or at least the last part is viewed as working, and therefore a work permit is required. So you see, it is quite important to really know what your people you send to Switzerland are really doing. In the end as well, whatever the individual is telling you might be true. However, in our current life or current work life, better to say, people decide in the moment whether they now start to do the one or the other thing. And as we have pushed employees to be flexible and to adjust their timetables and everything to work, we are in the situation that people then, as they are quite flexible, they will then say, even if it's meant they just come here to Switzerland for negotiating a contract, they say, okay, good, I'm already here, I have time this afternoon, so let's start already as we are sitting here together. But that changes now the situation, and a work permit should have been applied for before. Sometimes it's also quite unclear whether it is employment or not. And then in most cases, we say the best way is to actually contact the labor market authority and then get it in writing whether, in their opinion, it is viewed as employment or not. However, to help you a bit to see whether what is meant as employment and what is not, we have put down here a couple of samples which might help you on the daily basis. And there is also the issue about the meetings where we usually have quite a lot discussions. And there are two examples. One is if the meeting is only really exchanging information, and it's really based on just the exchange, nothing else, then the Swiss authority views that as without performing work, and therefore no work permit is required. However, and that is the second sample, there, if a manager has a global team here and comes regularly for staff meetings, this is viewed as work, performing work, and therefore a work permit is required. And there you see it really depends what the individual is doing, and this might help you then on a daily basis. If we do have cleared and clarified whether somebody is now working or not. And if we say, okay, the individual who is sent to Switzerland is working, we do have one possibility where there is an exception, that is the 8 days exemption rule. These 8 days exemption rule we use quite often, and it is important to understand how it works. If the employer of the individual is outside of the EU EFTA, then it's quite easy, because then we can say every employee coming to Switzerland can work here in Switzerland for up to 8 days without any need of a work permit. So all the 8 days he can work, but no work permit is required. In case now the employer is in the EU EFTA region, like in Italy, for example, then we do have to do 2 checks. One check is we have to see whether the company has used already 8 days. So on the employer level, the employer can send people to Switzerland for up to 8 days without the need of a work permit. And the employee can work in Switzerland for up to 8 days in Switzerland without the need of a work permit. Now, you need to do both checks, and both checks have to, in the end, have to get the answer, no, the 8 days are not used. If the employer has already used up the 8 days because he sent already different people or other people to Switzerland, then the employee, even he has not used the 8 days already, he has to have a work permit from the first day on. So therefore, that makes it not very easy in practice. Here is a sample to it. Mr. Giovanni, an Italian citizen, is employed by a legal entity in Italy and should train the team in Zurich for a project from the 4th to 8th of January 2021, which are 5 working days. Now, in January 2021, definitely at those days, the company cannot have used up already their 8 days, and therefore, these 5 days he is working in Switzerland. These can be used under this exemption rule, and no work permit is required. Now, in the second scenario, the trip will be postponed to July. Now, in July, you definitely have to check whether the Italian legal entity has used up already their 8 days, which they can send people to Switzerland without the need of a work permit. If they are used up, then a work permit is required. If they haven't used it up, then no work permit is required. So you need to make these 2 reviews in the situation. If now a work permit is required, there is a mandatory labor law conditions which have to be fulfilled. One thing is about the Swiss salary. So if you send somebody to Switzerland, the individual has to receive as much as a Swiss person would receive being locally employed in Switzerland. We will look at that in a moment, how to calculate it and what it means. And the second thing is that there is an obligation to reimburse assignment expenses, and we will look at that in a different slide as well, what that actually means. The last 2 things are also an obligation, but usually not really a big issue, which is regarding the minimum duration of vacation. As in Switzerland, we only have legally 20 days vacation. Usually all the other countries have more vacation days, and therefore that is never an issue. The working hours and rest periods as well, usually we have 45 hours you can work in a week. So, which is more than all our other, or almost all than other countries have. Therefore, there is no problem at all with that part. However, where we struggle is with the Swiss salary, because that also means that the cost for an assignment, whether that is now that somebody is assigned to an affiliated company in Switzerland, or whether that it means he is working on a project, makes the whole thing much more expensive. Also here in Switzerland, we do not make our life very easy, as there are different tools in place, and the cantons have not decided on one tool. So depending on where the employee is working in Switzerland, we have to do a different calculation. In principle, both tools are set up in the same way. However, they are referring to different data, and therefore you have different, in the end, a different information, or receive different salaries. What is important to know, and we look at that in a sample as well, is that if you send somebody to Switzerland only working for a couple of days in Switzerland, then you only need to put up his salary to the Swiss salary level for those days, for the effective days he is working in Switzerland. The figures we will see in a moment are monthly figures. And what we need in the end to do is we need to divide the monthly figure by 21.66 days. And that is in all cantons the same division factor to get the daily allowance. We also look at that in a sample, how to calculate it. And here is the salary tool. You put in a couple of information, and then in the end, you get a result, and you see the result on the right-hand side, which gives you a lower quartile, a median, and the maximum. What is important in the end for Swiss applications is the median, as well as the middle column, the median. The lower quartile says basically that this is the salary 25% are covering or are having this type of salary. The median is saying this type of salary have basically the average in Switzerland. Based on, and you see above, the factors we have used, we have said that person works in Zurich, he's working in a financial industry, he is on a management level, as well as the number of hours, the age, and the number of years of services. You see there are two lines basically. The first line, the lower salary, is for women. Now in Switzerland, we should have equal salaries between women and men. However, that is a theory still. In practice, there you see the result. In practice, we still have a huge difference between women's salary or female salaries and male salaries. For all applications, and it doesn't matter whether that is now a man you send here to Switzerland or a woman, we always have to use the male number. Now, looking at that salary tool, if we have now calculated how much the Swiss equivalent salary will be for a person, we have now the situation that we will want to send an employee to Switzerland for 15 days in May. And we think now about whether we do the notification or the 120 days work permit. We come in a second then what notification and what the 120 days work permit means. But we have a difference between the salary, as I just mentioned on the previous slide. So what we do is we first look at the current salary the employee receives abroad. And if we say that is 12,500 euros, so we will exchange it with the current exchange rate to get the Swiss salary, which is 13,968.20. For the notification, we then say, look up in the salary calculator, what is the lower quartile, what is the salary, the equivalent salary, and there we come up with 14,393. Now, we said that that person will only work for 15 days in May. So we don't have now to provide him with the complete difference. And the difference is then the Swiss equivalent salary of 14,393 minus the salary he receives already in Italy, which is these 13,968.20, which gives the result of 424.80. So that is basically the difference between his current salary and the Swiss equivalent salary. And if we say the individual has to earn as much as someone would earn in Switzerland, that difference has to be paid. Now, because he's only working 15 days, we split up these 424.80 by 21.66 days, because that we say is the average number of days in a month somebody is working. Multiplied with the 15 days, he is definitely working. So you will have to pay that individual 294.18 Swiss francs for this assignment of 15 days. And that is the calculation we do with the notification. With the 120 days work permit, we do the same type of calculation, same way, there's no difference at all. The only difference is that we now have to use in the salary calculator, the median salary and not anymore the lower quartile. And there you see in the end that the difference for these 15 days is about 1,400 Swiss francs. So for the 120 days work permit, if he's working under that type of permit, the entitlement he gets based on the difference of his current salary and the Swiss equivalent salary is 1,697.92. So you see there is a huge difference in between. However, sometimes it's not just or you make not the decision based on what type of permit you use or the amount. There are other factors you have to look at as well. Now, I said before, there are additionally mandatory benefits on top the assignment expenses. And assignment expenses are the accommodation, the travel cost, as well as the board, meaning like for the food. What you can do is you can either reimburse that effectively or with a lump sum. And below on that slide, you see the lump sums currently in place. As of 1st of April 2020 this year, the Swiss government has decided that it is not anymore necessary for someone being here in Switzerland on an assignment for 5 years, for example, that you pay the Swiss equivalent salary, plus you as an employer pay for the accommodation, the travel cost, as well as the food. So what has been decided is that after 12 months assignment, you can actually cease these additional costs like accommodation, travel cost, and food. You don't need to pay that any longer. However, you still have to pay the Swiss equivalent salary. So that will not change. Let us look at an example in this regard. An employee is working for Master Ltd in Italy, and he will be assigned to Switzerland for 54 days. The Italian salary is 3,000 euro, and the additional salary in order to meet the Swiss salary level is 2,166 euros. As well as he gets a daily allowance for food to add of 50 euros. If we look now at all the salary or all the cost we will have for that individual for those 54 days, then we have to see, we have to pay the salary for that individual, as well as additionally the salary difference, which is the 2,166 for those 54 days, which ends up in an additional payment of 5,400. We do have to pay the accommodation. Usually, if somebody's only coming for a couple of days, usually the employer pays that effectively because these are hotel expenses or something like this. As well as the daily allowance for food. This is quite often the case that people get a daily allowance. In this regard now, he is here for 54 days, so it's 50 euros multiplied by 54 days, which ends up in 2,700 euros. And the travel costs in the end will be paid effectively in this case. So you end up with additional cost of 8,100 euros plus the salary, plus the effective accommodation and the effective travel cost. Now, yes, that is quite huge. However, it is something the authority is really looking at and trying to make sure that every employer is paying it and every employee really gets it. This mainly will not always just be checked when we file the application, but sometimes it only will be reviewed in detail when the Labour Market Authority makes a control or an inspection. There are cantons where it will be done in the office. So a Labour Market officer is coming to the Swiss office and checking on the individual. And sometimes it's just made in writing by mail. What is important that definitely in case you do have a labour market control, you really cooperate with the authority, and then usually if you provide them with everything they need and you show them that you have tried to do everything and being compliant, then there is no problem at all. However, if certain documents are not at hand, and sometimes that is if the A1 confirmation, that's the document from the Social Security Authority confirming that someone is covered in the system abroad, then it can happen that the Labour Market Inspector will say, oh, if you don't have that A1 and you can't show it to me, then you actually have to stop to work. And we have those cases, for example, in Geneva, where they are quite strict on it. And the situation is as well, if you once have been controlled and were not compliant, then it is a quite high likelihood that on all the notifications you will do for your employees when sending them to Switzerland, you will have or end up with having additional labour market controls. The sanctions can be between fines, and usually it is just financial fines or an entry on a list from the state secretary, which you can see online. As well as if a company is really not compliant, it can end up that it is blocked, or the employer is blocked for further work permits. And then for example, the Italian entity cannot send any person to Switzerland any longer to work here. As a quick sample, in case you make a mistake in the notification process, and we come to that in a second, what kind of mistakes you can do. If you do the first mistake, you usually just get a reminder letter. If you do the second mistake within a 3 years period, you always will get a fine. And there they are quite strict. And the fine can start between 500 Swiss francs, can go up to 20,000 Swiss francs, or even higher, depending on what you did. Night, Saturday and Sunday work permit. I only would like to point out that if you have requested a work permit and the work permit is in place, then that does not mean that the individual can actually work during night on a Saturday or on a Sunday. Now, Saturday is a bit in brackets because there we have cantonal differences. Some cantons see the Saturday as a normal work day, like in Zurich, and some cantons see the Saturday as a special day where an additional approval needs to be applied. So in case you send people to Switzerland and they definitely have to work either during a night or on a Saturday or Sunday, then you need to get an additional permit for them allowing to work then. And that is in addition to the work permit you need for the people working here. The Schengen visa, I said earlier already, is only something which is relevant for non-EU EFTA nationals. Therefore, I don't want to go now here into much details, but it is something where we have to look at very strictly if there is someone coming or if there is a non-EU EFTA national, then he definitely has to keep in mind that he's only staying up to these 90 days in the Schengen area within the 180 days period. And there in Switzerland, the controls are very high, and we have a lot of cases already where people have overstayed only maybe for 1 or 2 days, and then there were a fine coming from the customs when they left Switzerland. Now during COVID-19 situation, it's a bit relaxed, and we do have different rules on this, but that is something in Switzerland where we do have a lot of issues with. This was a bit of an overview about all the aspects we definitely have to look at. And now if we have to assess what type of work permit do we have to request, we have to look at whether that work permit, whether that person is working in Switzerland, how long he is working, where the employer is situated, and then in which canton we actually have to request the work permit. So we will start with working for less than 90 days in Switzerland. And there we have two options. One is the notification option, which is the easiest, easiest work permit. Usually it's done online. It's you can register a company in Switzerland in that tool, and then you can start to notify your employees. Like, for example, the Italian company can register in that tool and then send people over that notification tool. It's for providing services or performing any kind of work or activity. Now, the restriction we have is that the legal entity, like the Italian company, has only 90 days to use that notification. And there you see as well that that might be not sufficient for the one or the other company. In addition, we have the situation that the notification has to be done 8 days before someone starts to work. So 8 calendar days before the person comes to Switzerland, we need to do the notification in order that everything is good and the person can work here. if, for example, you're not considering these 8 days or make a mistake in calculating it, and you only have considered in the end 7 days, this will be basically your first mistake then. And if it's your first mistake, you just will get the reminder letter, as I just mentioned before. There are a couple of industries in which we do need to make the notification from the first day, which is basically one is in the construction area, where the notification has to be done from the first day. Who can use the online notification? Basically, we can use it for legal entities who are situated in one of the EU-EFTA member states, who send then employees which are also EU-EFTA nationals or non-EU-EFTA nationals, but they have to be resident for more than 12 months in an EU-EFTA member state. So there we have to look a bit careful since when they are in the EU-EFTA region in order to have them as well under the online notification. We use that usually for people coming here to Switzerland on a very short notice, as well as for just a couple of days, and use it then later on really as something where maybe there's an urgent need for an employee coming to Switzerland, and then that is quite a good tool to use. What is the procedure and the method? It is you first calculate the Swiss equivalent salary, which we've done just before. You register the company, and then you do the notification. You get the approval of the notification within a day, even 2 to 3 days, and then everything is good. However, you do not have to wait for the approval. It is, as soon as you have notified the employee, everything is okay. What is important, because there are only these 90 days you have as a legal entity from abroad, it is important that in case you don't need to use certain days, that you definitely do cancel those days, and you have to do that before the specific day is there. Here you see a quick screenshot from the online tool you can use. That is also available in Italian, so it's usually quite easy to do. And you do not have to upload or send in any kind of documents, which makes it also easy to use. There is an example of counting days. As said, the employer has 90 days in which they can send people to Switzerland. Now, these 90 days is calculated really as calendar days. And if, for example, I have 8 employees which I want to send from the 1st of May till the 11th of May to Switzerland to work, these are, if we say every day they work, it is 10 days they will work. It is only from my 90 days quota, basically I used up 10 days for it. Because it doesn't matter how many people I send on one day, it is still only counted as one day. However, if I send these 8 days on different days, each employee will have different 10 days they need to work in Switzerland. This will end up for me as an employer as 80 days out of my 90 days quota. And there you see that you need in the end to look at when to use the notification, and when maybe you rather would like to use a different type of work permit, where we look in a second, the 120 days permit. If the 90 days are completely exhausted, so you used up all these 90 days and you get each calendar year just a new 90 days release, so to speak, then basically you only have, can use then for any person after that, the 120 days permit or the L or the B permit. And therefore, if you even send then a person for only 2 or 3 days, you will have to then do the whole application process. Therefore, it's quite important to, in the beginning of a year, to assess the situation and see how many people will travel and how many people will work in Switzerland, and for what kind of number of days, to realize that, okay, if you have somebody working in Switzerland for 20 or 30 days, and you know that for sure, you rather will go and request a 120 days permit instead of using those 30 days out of your 90 days quota. This is also where we would like to really point out, because it is something people forget. If you have made that notification and you need to do that 8 days in advance, and in the end, 2 days before it should happen, the employee will tell you, oh, I can't go because either the client is not there or whatever happened, then please go and delete that day, the notified day, because it will be then credited again towards your 90 days, and it will be not deducted as a notified day because you have not used it. Also, in case of inspections in the end, if you haven't deleted the day, the officer thinks that the employee will be in or had been working in Switzerland, and you will need to provide then proof that the individual has not been in Switzerland, which is sometimes quite tricky. We have as well the possibility, or that notification tool can also be used by self-employed people or sole trader. And this is something where in some countries we do struggle a bit, because there's a different definition what a self-employed person or a sole trader is. From a Swiss perspective, and now from a Swiss immigration perspective, we basically look at how the employee is registered with the Social Security Authority. If the employee is registered as an employee of your company, then he is an employee, no problem at all. If he is registered as self-employed in the Social Security system, then we will see him as a self-employed person, which means in the notification part, we take them out of the company's quota. He has then to register himself as a self-employed person in the notification tool, and can use 90 days on his own for coming over to Switzerland. So this is something we have to look at very carefully. And here is just a quick sample about the notification process of a self-employed person. The challenges, and I think I have raised them now, is that we do need to know exactly whether somebody is working in Switzerland or not. And the definition of employment is sometimes not that clear. In the notification process, we notify the exact days somebody is working in Switzerland. And if those exact days we notify in the end will not be really the practice, then there is a bit of an issue, and we cannot really change anything retroactively. The other thing is that we have to do the notification usually 8 days in advance. And therefore, it's not quite that flexible in the end in practice. We will see now in the second possibility or option with the 120 days work permit, what other option there is. The 120 days work permit is, for example, if you have used up already all your notified days, or you think about somebody who is working, for example, about 30 days in Switzerland, then the 120 days work permit might be a very good option. The 120 days are counted, and we will look at that in a second, in different ways. Basically, it is the permit itself is for rendering services or performing an activity here in Switzerland, and you will see that it is much more flexible than the notification. Because with that permit is the employee then allowed to spend and work 120 days in Switzerland, and he can flexibly decide whether he wants to come on Monday or Tuesday. He just has to make sure on his own that he is not exceeding the 120 days. The disadvantage is there's an application process before he is allowed to do that. And we'll look at that in a second. Who can use the 100 days work permit? Basically everybody. Everybody can use the 120 days work permit. There is no restriction as we had with the notification process for non-EU EFTA nationals or so on. There's we can use it for everybody. The only difference now is that we have to look from the salary point of view. We do have to use the Swiss equivalent salary for the application, as well as the authorities will review the work permit application and look at whether the employee is a specialist or not. And there we sometimes have an issue with somebody being lower qualified to use that method. The 120 days permit can be used, and there are cantonal differences as well. Either it is in a calendar year, so from the 1st of January till the 31st of December, or it can be, if we, for example, request now a 120 days permit starting from the 1st of July this year, 2020, till next year, the 30th of June, 2021. Or it can also be used just for a 4-month period. So the permit itself can be used for those 3 different scenarios. Every time or with all these 3 options, the employee does not need to get registered here in Switzerland. The permit itself is not subject to quota, so it's quite easy. And the employee just has to really use a calendar and then see that he's not overdoing the 120 days. What is the process for EU EFTA nationals? Basically there as well, we do have to calculate the Swiss equivalent salary. We do need to use the median, and then we do have to file the application, and we receive a labor market approval and then a final approval from the migration authority. Usually the process takes 2 to 4 weeks. What you also need to know is that in case now somebody exactly he's working on one location, and later on during the year you see, oh, he needs to work on a different in a different canton as well, or a different location. For each location or each additional location, you need to request an additional approval. This is also an application you need to file, but it is quite easy to get, and it's more or less only a matter of formality. For non-EU EFTA nationals, the process is basically the same thing. The only thing is that some of the individuals still need to request a visa based on the final approval, as well as that the processing time is a bit longer. Usually we see about 4 to 8 weeks for which the application takes. And there, for those type of permits, it is the Schengen regulation quite important, and that really needs to be very carefully considered. As you see, that type of application is much easier. We usually use it really if somebody needs to flexible work here in Switzerland, and to safeguard some of the notification days, to see that we really keep those days and use them in case there is any kind of emergency. Now, in case that 120 days quota is still not really what we need to have somebody longer in Switzerland working, then there is the possibility of short-term permits, L and B permits.
Sorry, Frederica, sorry. Before to switch to this session, there is a question from Christina, just forwarded to me, and I can recollect for you, and if Christina wants, can integrate me and forward other question to Frederick. Christina asks, slide 34 as a reference. Okay. Can we look at the example? Specify if we use up to 90 days within 1 year, for example, is it possible to employ an individual recently hired with one of the branches abroad, same Italia legal entity though, and send him to Switzerland? Will the counter restart this way? Christina is correct. If you want to add something.
Yes, I would like to just take a quick look at the example here.
Yes.
Thanks.
We have often the question, because of these 90 days quota, that sometimes companies are getting quite creative, and then they think, okay, we do have different legal entities in a country, and if, for example, the Italian headquarters, like in that example, has already used up the 90 days, but there are maybe 2 or 3 other legal entities in Italy, why not get the employee working under the other legal entities and then using the 90 days of those legal entities? This is possible. However, what you need to do is you need to transfer legally now, and from the employment contract perspective, you need to transfer that employee to the other legal entity, which you will in the end use then for doing the notification. And that is sometimes, depending on the country and depending on everything, might be a bit too lengthy process, or too many things you have to consider as well. And therefore, that might be not really the best option. From an immigration perspective, we always look at where is the employee employed. So if we do want to use a different legal entity, the employee needs to be transferred to that different legal entity so that we can use the notification process under that new entity. Is that good for you as an answer?
Yes, thank you. I would like just to understand if that works the same for branches, because in our case, for example, we have a branch which is under the legal entity of in Italy. So does it work?
Yes, works
what
the
do you
same
have?
way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Frederica, go ahead up to slide 63, and then we will do on a break.
Good. Okay. So we are now for longer term permits. And there we have the L or B permit. L permit is the short-term permit, B permit is the long-term permit. We will look in a second what the length is meaning. Basically, it is, we do have to file a complete application for this, the same way as we do for the 4 months application. The only difference is now that for the application, we need to really have a good justification for that to get an L or a B permit, because those permits are subject to quota. And if you remember, I showed you before how much quota we have for EU EFTA nationals as well as for non-EU EFTA nationals. From the personal conditions, it is basically the person for whom we can get an L or B permit needs to be a specialist or qualified employee. We do need to provide really university degrees or proof of the work experience, and then we can get the work permit. What is also important is that from a salary point of view, we need to use as the Swiss equivalent salary, it will be used the median. So the same salary level as we use for the 120 days permits. We do have a difference regarding the length. The short-term permit, so the L permit, is for non-EU EFTA nationals only up to 24 months. So if an assignment is from the beginning already planned to be for 4 years or 5 years, then we get from the beginning a B permit for that individual. Now for EU EFTA nationals, an L permit can go up to 60 months. So it's not necessarily that that individual will get a B permit at all. Otherwise it will be, or for EU, non-EU EFTA nationals, it will be after 24 months, the individual gets a B permit. Now, in principle, it doesn't make really a big difference whether that person gets an L or a B permit. The only thing is that with a B permit, your spouse will be eligible to work in Switzerland based on your permit. Now, if the spouse is in any case an EU EFTA national, then there is no problem at all for that spouse to work here in Switzerland on a local basis. It only is an issue if the spouse is non-EU EFTA national, because to hire somebody in Switzerland on a local contract, that is quite an extensive situation. As said, there's a quota applicable. Also, with anything or any assignment longer than 4 months, somebody has to get registered in Switzerland. That registration takes place at the place somebody has his apartment rented. For assignments, we have then the possibility to exempt somebody from Swiss health insurance in case that is needed or that is wanted. Usually, if somebody is coming from an EU member state to Switzerland, usually we do the exemption from the Swiss health insurance because it is quite expensive in Switzerland. Now, people who might be assigned sometimes from India or China, we can also exempt them from Swiss health insurance, but the coverage they have from abroad is not really sufficient, and therefore we don't do the exemption, we just get them enrolled in the Swiss health insurance. The conditions for expatriates, some of that I already said. It needs to be a specialist. We do have the quota we have to look at, and there, if you remember the slides I showed you before about the quotas, there were for EU EFTA nationals, we do have quotas which are released on a quarterly basis. which are then for the whole of Switzerland, as well as we have for non-EU EFTA nationals, quotas are released annually and per canton. But that is then just a thing where we sometimes have to look from a timing perspective, at least for EU EFTA nationals, when to file it in order to benefit from the quota. The additional allowance of accommodation, food and travel have to be paid, and as mentioned earlier, just have to be paid for the first 12 months, and then this can be waived. There is a pre-employment period applicable, not for EU EFTA nationals, but for non-EU EFTA nationals, which is actually 12 months. So the individual has to be employed for 12 months in order for us to be able to get an L or an B permit. From the procedure, you see as well here, it's more or less similar to the procedure we had for 120 days permit. The only difference is it takes a little longer, 4 to 8 weeks you have to consider, and there is a registration necessary in Switzerland. For non-EU EFTA nationals, it's also the same way as the 120 days permit. The only difference is there is an additional approval, which is the federal approval. So those applications, the federal authority will review as well. And the processing time is 6 to 12 weeks, depending a bit on the person who has to get the L or B permit and the canton in this regard. After the registration, there's also biometric data appointment required, because for non-EU EFTA nationals, we do have already biometric permit cards. This also will come or will be done for EU EFTA nationals, but it takes a bit longer until the Swiss authorities have that in place for everybody. I already said a word about the foreign integration law for spouses. Now, since 1st of January 2019, we have that new law. And basically, Switzerland said that what we need to do is we need to integrate now, and you will see there who that is, the non-EU EFTA national spouses of a non-EU EFTA national. So the Indian who is coming with his Indian wife to Switzerland and stays longer than 2 years, that person has to be integrated. Anybody else, apparently we don't need to integrate in Switzerland. The integration is basically that that individual needs to prove either to be enrolled in a language school to learn, if it's now in the canton of Zurich, to learn German and to get there the A1 certificate on German. If it's in Geneva, it needs to be in French, and if it's in Ticino, it needs to be in Italian. If the employee or if the spouse is actually not going to the language school because she doesn't have any time or she doesn't want to, and we request then the extension after 1 year, basically the spouse will not get the residence permit extended, which is a huge issue. We not have that issue really with Indians or Chinese, but we do have that a couple of times with Americans who think that is just a bit of a nasty thing and therefore just don't want to go there. So that is something where we look at very carefully if somebody is coming for more than 2 years. One thing not quickly about working for a Swiss client, in case you do have a client here in Switzerland and you would like to send people to work here on the client basis, this is possible. There's no problem at all with that. However, what we have to look at is on the project agreement you have with the client, and the type of work permit we can in the end only request for your employees you send here to Switzerland is based on the timelines of the project and the project description. though that is the crucial document in the end for getting work permits to work here in Switzerland on the client side. The issues we have in practice is basically the compliance with the Swiss equivalent salary, that the cost factor here is quite huge if you look at what you have to pay in addition, and that companies try to minimize it as best as possible. Now, what you have to look at as well is in case you need somebody here in Switzerland for example, for 2, 3, or 4 years, you may want to think about whether you want not assign that person to Switzerland, but get him maybe locally employed here in Switzerland, because then these additional costs for accommodation, food, and travel, you don't have to pay, because on a local contract basis, that is not necessary. And if the individual is an EU-EFTA national, then there's no problem for that person to get the work permit. The person just needs to get registered, and that's it. Or if the person doesn't want to get registered here in Switzerland, maybe also the cross-border permit might be a possibility. And this is also the last type of permit we look at before the quick break. The cross-border permit is only possible if somebody is employed locally in Switzerland. And we do have the possibility to get for any person a cross-border permit. So for all EU-EFTA nationals, they just have to commute once a week. So the cross-border permit doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be someone just living in one of our neighboring countries. We also can have that type of permit for someone, for example, coming from the UK. That is also a possibility. The only restriction we still have is for non-EU-EFTA nationals. Those have to really commute on a daily basis, and they need to live in the cross-border zone as well as to work in the cross-border zone. And we have one slide where it shows you what the border zones are. For anybody else, we don't have any restrictions. The positive part is no quota is there applicable, so we can request as many cross-border permits as we want. The procedure for EU-EFTA nationals, it's quite easy. There will be a labor market approval as well as a final approval. And in regard to the salary level, there is not required to do a different type of salary calculation, because those people are already then have a local employment contract here in Switzerland, so everything is in line with the Swiss labor law. The process itself takes 2 to 4 weeks, depending a bit on the country, on the canton. There is, in principle, no registration necessary if somebody commutes on a daily basis. In case somebody is only commuting once a week, then a registration is required. And then they still have the cross-border permit, but we will see then after the break, from a tax point of view, for example, we look at them as an international weekly commuter. If somebody works on different places, there as well, we do have to get a work permit for each of the location separately. What also is required and needed, that we check on the health insurance part, because if somebody has a cross-border permit and is employed in Switzerland, in principle, the individual is subject to Swiss Social Security. Now in Switzerland, the health insurance is a bit of a separate issue, because it's something we usually take care privately, and it's not done through the employer. Here is the procedure listed down for non-EU-EFTA nationals. And there is the main part that for non-EU EFTA nationals, we also have to do a review of the job search, which makes it quite lengthy, and it's not used that often because also there's a restriction about the living and working in the cross-border zone. And here, as mentioned, is the border zones we have. However, as said, that is only applicable for non-EU EFTA nationals. So if you have an American, for example, who lives in Italy directly at the border, he can then work in Switzerland, but it also needs to be in 10 kilometers from the border. And that is the last slide for the cross-border permit situation, where there is the possibility, or where we have to look at the health insurance impact. There is a possibility for someone now living in Italy and working in Switzerland that he can choose whether he wants to be enrolled in the Swiss health insurance system or he wants to remain in the Italian health insurance. In some countries, that is easily done, that you don't need really to have an employer to get health insurance coverage, and sometimes that is an issue. What I can say from a Swiss perspective, the Swiss health insurance is already, if you live here in Switzerland, quite expensive. Now for cross-border people, the health insurance is even higher than if you live completely, if you registered here in Switzerland and live here in Switzerland. So sometimes then we suggest that somebody takes up residence here in Switzerland in case he wants to have the Swiss health insurance, because it makes quite a difference. This was the overview about the immigration part.
We have a question to submit to Friederike. Mm-hmm. Just a moment. Okay. The first one is the Italian company signs a contract with a Swiss client and needs to send employees to meet with the client and plan project activities. Is this kind of meeting considered work, so must they make the notification?
If it's really only the planning of the project, nothing else, so not starting, only saying, okay, phase 1 will take until whatever, and these tasks are covered under phase 1, then this is not viewed as working and no work permit is required.
Okay. And the second question I received is, in case of employees assigned for a few days to Switzerland for emergency with short notice, the company should meet the 8 days requirement or not?
The emergency, or what is viewed from a Swiss perspective as an emergency, is really very, very limited. So whenever possible, they should see to really try to view or consider the 8 days. If they can't, and if it's not really an emergency based on Swiss way of thinking, an emergency is, for example, the elevator in a building is not working anymore, or the gate to get to a building is not opening anymore. This is viewed from a Swiss perspective as an emergency. Now, not everything is covering up or covers that up. So basically what we do is, and suggest is, go and speak to the Labour Market Authority directly in case you can't consider the 8 days, to be on the safe side.
I see, but also I know very well the concept of emergency that our client have, and often they say that they aren't able to plan with a so consistent time, the short assignment that could involve some of their employees. So I understand absolutely the picture you have been designing. At the same time, I know that this is a matter of fact that our company have to acquire as concept to move and switch to their business management, because often they say emergency is the rule, is the normal, the usual practice we have to manage daily. So I understand that this matter could open this kind of issue. But thank you for your reply. Okay.
Welcome.
We can go ahead.
Okay, good. So we will start then with the Swiss Social Security implications. This is much easier than the immigration part. The general rule is, and that is not different in Switzerland as in any other country, in principle, somebody is subject to Social Security liability in the country he is working. And there are then a couple of exceptions, and one exception is based on assignment, where, for example, if somebody is employed in Italy and is now assigned to work in Switzerland, if we consider the basic principle, he should be subject to Swiss Social Security. Now, because he is assigned, there is a possibility then to get the individual exempted from Swiss Social Security, and that he can remain in the Italian Social Security system. This is a possibility, and we'll look in a moment how that actually will work. In Switzerland, I don't know how familiar you are with our system. We have a three-pillar system. Basically, the first pillar is about the retirement benefits as well as the unemployment benefits. So it's really the state pension part. Based on if we are then retired, we should be able, with getting the state retirement benefit, we should be able to kind of cover our minimum living expenses. The second pillar is something which is also mandatory in Switzerland. So every employee is enrolled in a second pillar as well, which is our pension fund. And with the pension fund, together, if we are getting, or if we are retired, we should actually have about 60% of our last income receiving while we are then retired. So that should be okay to live quite well. The third pillar we have in Switzerland is really a private situation. And from a tax point of view, lots of people subject to Swiss taxes are seeing to get a Pillar 3A account, which is you can use that quite flexibly. And in case you are then getting retired, you get there a payout. But during the time you pay in, the full amount you pay into that Pillar 3A is tax deductible. To give you an idea about what Swiss Social Security looks like, we have done here a calculation for someone with 11,000 Swiss francs as base salary. So the employee has to pay the Swiss Pillar 1 contributions, which is the retirement and disability benefit, which is 5.275%. Then unemployment rates we have, the individual also has to pay accident insurance, at least for non-professional accidents. For professional ones, the employer has to pay the contributions. We then also have a daily sickness insurance. This is basically covering in case somebody gets sick. and can't work based on that, and then the pension fund. So that gives a lot of deductions. Where we do see a huge difference to other countries is that our state social security contribution, so the first line you see, there is no limit to this. So these 5.275% will be deducted if you earn 5,000 Swiss francs or 100,000 Swiss francs. Also on all, really on all employment income. So there is no limit or no ceiling we have. The individual we have seen here has 2 children, so they receive a child allowance 200 Swiss francs per child. What you don't see here as a deduction is the health insurance contribution. And that is what I said earlier, this is a private affair in Switzerland. And you individually can choose now, we have, I think, about 100 different health insurance companies, and you can get enrolled wherever you want. There's no, the health insurance needs to actually also enroll you or get you listed there, at least for the basic insurance. Then if you do want to have additional insurance coverage, that is something else. But for the basic one, every health insurance has to take you on. It doesn't matter how healthy you are or in case you have some health problems. Now, if we understand the Swiss system, and if we are now talking about assignments, we have 2 scenarios. We have countries which will have a social security agreement, and we do have countries where we don't have any social security agreement. So in case, for example, we do send someone from Peru to Switzerland, there's no agreement in place. So that person, even if on assignment, will be subject to Swiss social security. You might as well be then in the end subject to Peruvian social security contributions, but that is then on top. For the countries with whom we do have a social security agreement in place, there is the possibility, as raised earlier, that we can get them exempted from the Swiss system. We do have now, or we do have to differentiate in the end which agreement we actually have to take on. And you will see in a second with the 2 examples we made why that is important. The agreement of free movement, which Switzerland has signed with the EU member states, is only applicable for EU EFTA nationals. Better to say, the EU agreement we have is only for EU nationals and Swiss nationals applicable. And the EFTA agreement we have is only for the EFTA nationals as well as for the EFTA countries in Switzerland applicable. So we do have to really look what is the nationality in the end from the employee, as well as from which country he is coming to Switzerland. And therefore, the bilateral agreement or the social security agreements we had before we have even implemented the agreement of free movement are still in place and still important for us. And you see on the right-hand side those agreements with which countries we do have them. So, as just raised, for us it is important in order to determine which agreement we can actually use and to try to get somebody exempted from Swiss social security, we need to check in which country does the employee work, or where is he subject to social security contributions prior to the assignment. Then we need to see to which country will he be assigned. Now, if we talk about Switzerland, it will be Switzerland. And then what is the nationality of the employee? And these 3 questions, if we have answered them, leads us then to the right agreement we can use. And you see in a moment why that is, why we do need to make that difference. Here is now an example for an EU national. So the Italian employee is assigned from Rome to Switzerland for 8 months for training purposes. What do we need to do from a social security point of view? He is Italian national. He's coming from Italy to Switzerland. So we can use the agreement of free movement. So we call it now here the EU agreement. And that agreement covers all the social security branches, meaning he has not to pay any contributions at all in Switzerland. The only thing we need to do in the end is to get a copy of the A1 from the Italian Social Security or the Italian entity. And what we have to do is then to get or to apply for the exemption from the Swiss health insurance. And this is effectively have to be done. In regard for the exemption from all the other health, insurance contributions, nothing has to be done. There's no need to file a separate application or request or anything. Just the Swiss entity needs to have a copy of the A1 and that's it. Only for the health insurance we do need to file that exemption because that is a separate situation. If you don't do it, the authority will enroll the employee within 3 months to a Swiss health insurance, and that's it. And the employee will then have to pay, in principle, Swiss health insurance contributions. You still can file after these 3 months the exemption. However, it's then with a huge administration behind. So that is really something you need to make sure to take care in case you do want to have him exempted from Swiss health insurance. And here is what I just mentioned already. The A1 certificate is the main document and the most important one in that regard. Now the example now for a non-EU EFTA national. For example, same thing, situation, just it's an US employee now assigned from Rome to Switzerland. So Rome and Switzerland are both EU member states. However, the employee is US employee, so US national. So not the EU agreement is now relevant, but the bilateral agreement or the social security treaty, which was before in place between Italy and Switzerland. The important part there is that in the Social Security Treaty, not all the Social Security branches are covered. And therefore, there is a likelihood that some of the insurances will actually kick in from a Swiss perspective. Now, in practice, we have seen that the Swiss authorities are, for anybody up to 1 year, they will not impose any social security contributions in any other of these branches. If the equivalent document to the A1, that is the certificate of coverage, is in place, then in principle the Swiss entity is okay, not paying any contributions towards the Swiss social security system. Also in this regard, the employee needs to get exempted from the Swiss health insurance, and that really has to be done here as well in writing. And there is the same situation as for the EU national. So that is something you really need to keep in mind, because that is completely different as the EU agreement between the EU member states, where all the nationalities are covered. In Switzerland, we do have there a difference for that in that regard. And here is listed down now the different steps. Like you do have to request the certificate of coverage, which is quite important. You also get that from the Italian, if the person is coming from Italy, from the Italian Social Security Authority. The important thing is in regard to the accident insurance, because it's not listed in the Social Security Treaty, the individual cannot even be enrolled in Switzerland in the accident insurance. Usually what you need to do is to see that the accident insurance someone has, for example, now here in Italy, is really covering Switzerland as well while the individual is on assignment. And that just has to be looked at separately. What often gets actually completely forgotten, and which also is something in the past the authorities have not really looked at it so strictly. However, also in Switzerland we need money, and therefore that is something the authority have started to really look at. And it is now about the non-working accompanying spouse. If, for example, the individual is exempted from Swiss Social Security, the employee is sent to Switzerland. And if we take now the first point, that is about the Italian coming here to Switzerland with his spouse. He will be here for example, for 2 years. He will be remaining in the Italian Social Security, exempted from the Swiss Social Security. Then the non-working accompanying spouse is subject to Swiss Social Security. In principle, we'll look at that in a second, how that works. In principle, you have to get enrolled with the Swiss Social Security authority. You need to do that actively because nobody is actually asking you to do that. If you don't do that, it just takes a bit of time until then the Swiss authorities will realize it and will impose the contributions. We will look at that in a moment. In regard, if someone is now, if we have to use now the Social Security Treaty, like before for the American coming from Italy to Switzerland, there it depends on the Social Security Treaty. In almost all of them, we have an exemption for them. So if the American is coming now with maybe his Italian wife to Switzerland, but the wife doesn't want to work here, then the wife can be exempted from that Swiss Social Security requirement. She doesn't have to pay any contributions. Now, if the Italian is coming with his Italian wife, he has to pay, in principle, Social Security contributions for the non-working spouse. And here is the basis in the end, how we calculate those annual Social Security contributions. If we have a situation like the annual income of the husband, which is exempted from the Swiss Social Security system, he earns 250,000 Swiss francs. So we use in the end 50% of the retirement income as one basis, as well as 20 times the retirement income, which is the annual, which is based on that 50% of the retirement income, so that basis ends up in 2,500,000. Then we look at the assets of the couple, so of both together. If we say the couple has 1.5 million, we say 50% because they are married belongs to the spouse, which is 750,000. We add the 20 times retirement income plus the 50% of the asset, which adds up to the 3.25 million. And then we go in the table I showed you on the slide before, look up what the annual Social Security contributions are. In that case now, it is 8,097 Swiss francs. Now you will say you have never heard of that and it has never happened for any person you sent to Switzerland. That might be true. The thing is, as said, the authorities are starting to really look at that. And sometimes it takes a bit until they see it. Because basically, if you don't know that, and if you do not actively go to the Social Security Authority and register, which you should do, the authority waits until the tax return has completely assessed and that usually takes 1 to 2 years. And only after the final assessment of the tax return, the information will be provided to the Social Security Authority, and then the Social Security Authority will contact the individual. And sometimes it's just the situation that the employee or the expat with the spouse is not any longer in Switzerland, and therefore they just actually will waive it and will not impose the Social Security contribution. So basically the advice will be, try to get the non-working spouse to work at least 20% to save these additional contributions. Now, we have a different situation as well, and that is now with people who are locally employed, who are not really assigned, but maybe locally employed in Switzerland, and then not working just in Switzerland, but maybe in another EU-EFTA country as well. And there we have these 25% rule, where we sometimes struggle quite a bit with it. I don't know how that is in Italy, but here we have lots of cross-border employees, and for them it is sometimes a usual thing to do that they have a second employment, or just maybe giving piano lessons privately on top at home, or working in the home office from time to time. And as soon as they work more than 25% in their home country, if we say the cross-border employee is, for example, living in Italy and working in principle in Switzerland, but can work from home, and that is more than 25% of his time, then he will be subject to Italian Social Security instead of Swiss Social Security. So that is for Swiss companies, where in the audits we have from the Social Security authorities, they look quite carefully on that. And that is something we have really to advise companies or employers have to take care that they look at that quite strictly. That only is applicable to EU-EFTA nationals living, for example, in an EU-EFTA member state and working in Switzerland. For any other person, as the EU-EFTA agreement is not being in place, and the Social Security treaties will cover those situations, there the Social Security will be splitted, and there is no problem at all. For self-employed person as well as dependent employee, the situation is same thing. There we only have the differentiation that we say an employment of less than 5% of the total work time or total income, which we will see as not relevant, and then it doesn't matter at all and we not consider it. We have a couple of people just basically with Germany, Germans living in Germany, but might be CEO or something in Switzerland. They do want to have that from a tax point of view. There's a different taxation, because those people will be then taxed in Switzerland instead of in Germany, even if they live in Germany. And the Swiss system is much favorable than the German one. However, the management of the company itself will be looked as a relevant employment, and therefore it is crucial whether they in the end work more than 25% in their home country. We also have the situation, which I raised earlier already, that self-employment is something where Switzerland is quite strictly looking what is self-employed. And this is different as in other countries. There's also an example like a member of the board of directors. This is for us an employee. Now in other countries, this is a self-employment. So there's also then, you have to look at very carefully. We have one example to this. An Italian national is a doctor and has his own practice in Italy. Based on the Social Security law, he is seen as a self-employed person. He takes up now an employment of 20% with a medical startup company in Switzerland. Now, based on the agreement of free movement, and based on the situation that he is dependent employed in Switzerland, his whole Social Security has to be done in Switzerland because he has a dependent employment in Switzerland. So he is, even for his self-employment in Italy, he is subject to Social Security contributions in Switzerland. And that might end up in some of the situation as a not really favorable situation. With keeping in mind, when I showed you how the Swiss Social Security system is, we actually have to pay contributions up to the last euro or Swiss franc. There is no ceiling at all. Now, looking at cross-border employees, which we looked at earlier already quickly, there it is, in principle, the Social Security liability is in the place of working. There is no exemption as such from the Social Security liability, except somebody is now working in their residence country for more than 25%, then the Social Security liability may switch to the country in where they are living. And one exception is about the health insurance, which we raised already earlier when I showed you the slide about whether a cross-border employee can choose between the Social Security, the health insurance contributions being paid in Switzerland or in the home country. For Italy, there is the possibility you can choose. And you've seen on that slide as well, there are then you need to make to make a difference between where these people are living, as it is really based on the residence country. One last example before we actually move then to the Swiss taxes. An Italian national commutes every day between Milano and Lugano. He's employed with a Swiss legal entity. The salary is paid out in Switzerland and the Swiss legal entity bears all cost. How does it look here? As said, the employee is subject to Swiss Social Security contributions, and the only thing he can do is can choose between being enrolled in the Swiss health insurance system or the Italian one. And please keep in mind that really the 3 months period for that choice needs to be considered. For an cross-border employee where you really want to use that choice, after the 3 months, it's over. If you don't choose then to be remaining enrolled in Italy, you will automatically be enrolled in the Swiss health insurance system. And there's no possibility afterwards to actually change it, except your personal circumstances will change. That was everything in regard to Social Security, which is a lot easier than the immigration part to deal with. We will now move then to the tax part. The Swiss taxes in Switzerland, there again, we have 26 cantons. As you've seen before, in regard to Social Security, I mean, we still have the 26 cantons, but there's not a big difference. We have one law, and which is applicable in all the cantons. There's no difference on it. In regard to taxes, there is a difference. it's the tax law. Each canton has its own tax law, and we also have on a cantonal as well as on a municipal level taxes imposed. So in the end, in Switzerland, we pay on 3 levels taxes: the federal taxes, and there is one law which is applicable throughout Switzerland, and then on a cantonal level as well as on a municipal level. And you may have seen, and you see it on the next slide as well, where we showed a table where you can see what the differences are between these cantons. And these is quite huge. There's a huge competition between the canton as well as with the different communes. From the filing system in Switzerland, or from the way how you pay taxes, as a Swiss person, you basically file a tax return. You have to file it until the 31st of March the next year. You can extend that filing deadline, but once you filed your tax return, you get then invoices and you just have to pay. You get, before the year end, you get already on account invoices, which you also have to pay, or you can pay. If you know already that your income or your assets will be lower, then definitely you will go back to the authorities and say you want to have them reduced. They usually do. And then after the tax return is filed, the final tax bills will be issued. For foreigners, we have the situation that we have a tax at source regime. And basically, any foreigner who has not a C permit already will have to pay tax at source, and the tax at source will be paid through the employers. The Swiss company has to deduct the taxes automatically from the salary. What we have to look at well is if we are in the expat situation or on assignments, whether we do have then double tax treaty with the country the employee is coming from, as well as whether no treaty is in place. In Switzerland, and that is different than in a lot of other countries, we do tax the income as well as the assets. However, the assets, that always sounds very huge and excessive, but the asset tax is actually not really huge or much. And the Swiss authorities basically need that in order to verify whether the income you have declared is actually reasonable and is correct. And here you see the numbers are very small, but you will see then in your handout as well the differences between the taxes. And that is, I mean, Zurich is not one of the cantons which is very tax favorable, but we do have like Schwyz, Zug. These are cantons which are, from a tax perspective, quite good. As an employer, my obligation is basically to declare the salary and the wages correctly, as well as, and that is for assignments, to calculate the tax at source correctly. That is sometimes not that easy if you are dealing with assignments and have people getting paid out in 2 countries. It's always quite a struggle to get everything correctly declared. The most important part is really that these declaration regarding tax at source as well wages, which you as an employer have, can impose, if you don't do that correctly, fines. And the fines can be quite severely. Here, the salary calculation we did before in regard to Social Security. And there you see now in the last part, if we do have a foreigner who is subject to tax at source, then we need to deduct the tax at source as well, which is here in that case 11.9%. In some cases, this is actually already the final taxation in Switzerland. Like if somebody, for example, earns only up to 120,000 Swiss francs in Switzerland as an annual income, gross income, then the tax at source you deduct in as an employer is the final tax liability. There's nothing else he has to pay in addition. Only for people earning more than 120,000 a year, for those we have to file a tax return on top, and then the tax liability might increase. And those people as well have then to declare their worldwide income as well as their worldwide asset. For anybody else below the 120,000, nothing has to be done. Now, that limit of 120,000 is different to Geneva. In Geneva, we have that the limit is 500,000. So only after any income above 500,000, there you need to file a Swiss tax return. If it's below, nothing has to be done. Now, if we do have an expat coming to Switzerland, we have to check whether a double tax treaty is in place to see that we can avoid any possible double taxation. And the avoidance is about that the same income or the same asset will not be taxed twice. In principle, in Switzerland, we actually exempt or do the avoidance with that we exempt the salary income or employment income. Now, in Italy, it is that in the treaty between Switzerland and Italy, it is the crediting. So both countries look at that different. So each time you have somebody coming to Switzerland and you want to see how the double taxation is avoided, you have to look at the double tax treaty, which is applicable for the situation. For expats, we have to look as well, because not all expats will come for 2 years in a row. Some come just for a couple of days or a couple of months. So the 183 days rule is quite important to understand. In principle, in the treaty, there are 3 conditions. So if you send an Italian to Switzerland, we have to see whether in Switzerland the individual was less than 183 days, and these are calendar days, whether salary has been paid out in Switzerland, or whether any cost will be charged to the Swiss entity. If all these 3 questions will be answered as no, then the individual remains subject to Italian taxation, and no Swiss income tax will be imposed. Where we sometimes have an issue is in Switzerland if a part of the cost will be charged to the Swiss entity, or the Swiss entity will cover a part of the cost. Like sometimes we have the issue that the apartment in Switzerland will be paid directly by the Swiss entity, or the employee gets a company car from the Swiss entity. Both basically means that a part of the cost will be borne in the Swiss company, and therefore the individual cannot be exempted from Swiss taxation, but he has then to pay Swiss income taxes for the period he is working in Switzerland. And that can also be that will be imposed retroactively. So in case to avoid it, please make sure that no payment will be done in Switzerland. And in case of apartment cost or a business car or whatever, rather give the employee directly, pay him a lump sum that he can lease a car in Switzerland or gets the apartment cost paid directly, as going through the Swiss entity. Where we have another issue in regard of these 183 days, even if we say now we have done really everything to be good and that we don't have to pay Swiss taxes, the last part is which is not that new, but we started, or the Swiss government started with that maybe 5 years ago, which is the factual employer principle. So for any work permit you will request for foreigners here in Switzerland, which is a 120 days permit or anything else, the Swiss tax authorities will most likely send you a questionnaire asking whether the Swiss entity or the Swiss employer is actually the employer of your employee. So in case you have somebody sent here to Switzerland for 4 months, and he is there for less than 183 days in Switzerland, you will not get him paid out any salary in Switzerland. You will not charge anything to the Swiss entity, but the Swiss entity, there is someone actually telling your employee exactly what he has to do. All the work the employee is doing, the Swiss company can benefit. The employee is in principle integrated in the Swiss organization. And those questions, or if that is the situation, then basically the Swiss employer will be viewed as the factual employer. And based on this, the Swiss government says, okay, even the rest of the conditions of the 180 days rule is okay. That person is subject to taxation from day one. So you have to really look at that principle. And on that document, we have showed you or listed down what the factual employer means and where you have to be important, where you have to really to look at. Here's again another example, because it really is something where we have lots of issues that in the end an individual is getting taxed in Switzerland. Not that the taxes is that huge. Usually it might be even a benefit. However, the whole administration behind it is so immense that you try to avoid in wherever possible to get somebody not subject to Swiss taxation. And there, as said before, if the 183 days rule, if one of the conditions is not met, meaning you answer that with yes, one of those 4 basically, then from the first day on, that person is subject to taxation. Where we also have sometimes an issue is if people are, or if companies try to see that they really are below these 183 days. And in the end, the employee thinks about later on the year, he wants to go on vacation in Switzerland on top, and then overstays these 183 days. So you really have to make sure that the 183 days are not just the days he's working or the employee is working here in Switzerland, it's any day the person is spending in the country. I already said that for foreigners we have the tax at source. And because of the tax at source regime, which is the employer is responsible for it, that whole 183 days regulation I just explained is very important. And if somebody is in the end then subject to taxation, and even if you only realize it in November, that actually the individual in the end had been longer than these 183 days in Switzerland, it is the obligation of the Swiss entity in the end to actually calculate the tax at source as well as pay that. And if you may remember, I showed you in the beginning of the slide where you see the fines in case the employer is not taking care of it. So that is something which is really very, very important. We do have for expats the expat regime. There's an expat audience where certain costs can be deducted. Important is that we can only use that for an expat coming here to Switzerland up to 5 years. The Swiss authorities started that in case now after the assignment of 5 years, a company thought, okay, the individual was working so well, we actually want to have him longer in Switzerland, and then extended the whole stay in Switzerland, that in the end, in the 6th year, the tax authority were coming back to the employee and saying, okay, you benefited now for the last 5 years, but because of you now staying longer than 5 years, we will take away the benefit you had for the last 5 years, which is a huge thing. And we look at that at the next slide, because it means as a benefit and where no taxes will be imposed can be the relocation cost if somebody is taking up residence in Switzerland, is maybe for 2 or 3 years coming over to Switzerland. The relocation costs can be paid tax-free, the travel expenses for the assignee and the family, the accommodation cost, as well as the school fees for the kids, depending now on the canton they are coming or they're residing. We need to look at the language. Like if, for example, an Italian is assigned to Ticino and he wants to enroll his kids in an international school, which is okay. However, the Swiss authorities think that the kids could also be enrolled in a Swiss local school, and therefore no additional cost needs to be imposed. And therefore the school cost for the international school, even if you pay that, will be not tax deductible. You can either deduct those effective costs or pay out the effective cost tax-free, or a lump sum of 1,500. And there you see if somebody is then in the end staying longer than those 5 years in Switzerland, and if he then gets in the 6th year, the bill for those tax-free items that he has to pay taxes on it, that is not a very nice thing. So there you need to be very careful if you really think about somebody who should be in the end longer than those 5 years in Switzerland. For cross-border employees, we do have a separate taxation system. However, with Italy, it is that if the cross-border is working in Switzerland and residing in Italy, Switzerland can tax it with the tax tariff we have for Tax-at-Swiss tariff we have for foreigners. And there you see we have with other countries a bit of different regulations. The last slide in regard to taxes is if you look now at someone who keeps his residence or his family maybe in Italy and is working from Monday to Friday in Switzerland, like a cross-border worker, but residing in Switzerland because it's too long or too far to travel every day. He will be subject to Swiss taxation. Now, because of him having his main residence still in Italy, in Switzerland he has only a limited taxation. So the tax-at-Swiss being paid through the whole year, every month deducted from the pay, is the final tax liability. Usually there's the possibility to file an additional return with the authority and to request a tax rebate, for example, for the travel cost, for the additional apartment you had here in Switzerland, as well as maybe you paid an additional amount to the pension fund and so on. So for certain items, there's a possibility to make a correction. We had the new rule imposed that that possibility is only applicable anymore if the family income, if 90% of the family income is received in Switzerland. If it's less, then there's no possibility at all that he can get a tax rebate. So meaning the final taxes he paid, or the taxes he paid in Switzerland throughout the year is the final tax liability. Nothing can be done. That is something where we look, or we have to look for international commuters quite well, because some of them would like to pay, for example, additionally something into their pension fund to increase in the end their retirement benefits, or to have a Pillar 3A account, which is tax deductible as well in Switzerland. However, in case if you don't have the 90% family income here in Switzerland, we usually have an issue because it's not tax deductible here. The 90%, you think, okay, if only the person here in Switzerland is working and the spouse maybe is not working at all, no problem at all. Now, that is a bit too simple. Usually, we have seen that lots of foreigners have their own houses in abroad, and towards the family income, even if you live in your own house and you don't have rental income, we will calculate a deemed rental income, and that will be counted to the family income. And usually, as soon as somebody has his own house and living in their own house, the 90% regulation, or the 90% rule, is actually something which hinders file a Swiss tax return, or the correction. That was the part about Swiss taxes in short. I do want, before I finish and have time to answer any questions, just a couple of words towards the COVID-19 situation.
Yeah, before to switch to COVID matter that are very strong, and we want to pay so much attention. I have a question from the attendant, and it refers tax matter. And it is the following: if an employee holds an L permit and stayed in Switzerland less than 183 days, in case he receives a tax return by the authorities, must he submit the tax return, or he has to explain to authorities to no taxes due under the Article 15 of the agreement between Italy and Switzerland?
Yes, yes. If he receives a tax return, he in any case has to respond, either with filing a tax return if in case he is subject to Swiss taxes, or he has to write back and say, based on Article 15, I'm not supposed to pay Swiss taxes.
Okay. Thank you. And I also asked to the attendants if are there other questions that they want to forward to Friederike live or directly. Also on social security matter, we have already shared before the tax focus. Are there some questions? Okay. So COVID-19 implications we are very interested in, because you know very well that as per our position, we are very interested in when, if there are the conditions that we could retake mobility towards Switzerland, what could be the limit, the conditions?
Yeah. We as well.
Sure, that surely you could forward to us. Thank you. Go ahead.
I mean, basically, at the moment, our life is much easier as before. The borders to the Schengen countries are open as well, meaning everybody from the Schengen countries can come to Switzerland again. We can file all the applications for anybody coming from a Schengen country to Switzerland. So there is, since 15th of June, we are very lucky and happy and good with that. Before we had a huge time to struggle, and that I have to say as well, the number of infected people in Switzerland are increasing again. We had a couple of issues in the last couple of days because of people apparently coming from Serbia or the Balkan region coming to Switzerland, who basically have kind of imported again the virus back, as well as people because they were able to go clubbing again, where the virus has infected a huge number of people again. So at the moment, the discussion in Switzerland is not regarding that we actually do close the border towards the Schengen countries again, but to make certain checks for people coming from the Balkan region, as well as that actually closing the clubbing part again. Because apparently, I mean, I don't know how that is in Italy, but if I go on the street and look at people and how they behave, it is, you would never think that we had a COVID-19 situation at all. I mean, people are standing very close. There's as well in Switzerland, we don't have an obligation to wear a mask wherever we go, only if we go to a hairdresser, and then we do have an obligation, or we go to certain shops. But in principle, there's nothing. If you go by public transportation, there is currently the discussion whether there should be an obligation. However, the Swiss authorities are quite relaxed apparently on it. There are only certain cantons which think that they definitely have to do something. Geneva just yesterday announced that they do think about starting to impose the obligation of wearing a mask from next week on. So here, basically everything is back more or less to life. The only thing we have is that the borders towards any other country as the Schengen countries are not open. We're currently discussing that starting from next Monday, there might be that they lift it. However, there are countries like the US where the number of infected people is very high. And the Swiss government does not really want to now lift the border towards the US. But in principle, they don't want also to have a kind of list of countries, of non-Schengen countries where they can, or where people can enter Switzerland, and a list of countries where they can't. So we will see what happens. We assume that we get any information either on Friday or on Monday morning, whatever then happens. At the moment, the situation is that if somebody is living in a non-Schengen country and we do want to have him working in Switzerland, we just not have to file an application for that individual. We also have to really justify why that person needs to be here. And these three topics I listed down on that slide is something where we have to provide the authority with an answer in order to get the application approved. The first two questions about can the start date be changed or can the work not be performed outside of Switzerland is sometimes quite easily be answered. The third one about the economic necessity is sometimes not that easy. Because if you do want as a company that the employees coming over to Switzerland and start here to work, not always is that linked to a risk of your reputation or a financial loss, or that you have to other employees to let go. So that is something which a lot of companies are struggling at the moment, and just hoping that starting from next week, we are good and back again on track, and everybody can basically come to Switzerland again as before. There's also from the Swiss government, at the moment at least, no quarantine obligation for people coming from abroad to Switzerland. There's only a couple of exceptions, but in principle there's nothing. The good news as well is that we do have reached an agreement with Italy. So Switzerland and Italy made an agreement regarding now the COVID-19 period, the agreement was valid until yesterday, but is extended on a monthly basis until both authorities basically say, now the COVID-19 situation, we have combated it, it's finished, it's done. The situation is that basically if now we had a cross-border permit employee who his employer was in Switzerland, and based on the COVID-19 situation, he just was working from home, so from Italy. In principle, Italy could have now imposed Italian taxes as well as Italian social security, because most likely, if he was now the last 3 months working from home, both could be changed or switched to Italy. Now the agreement is that during that COVID-19 situation, so starting from the 24th of February, everything will be looked, if somebody stayed at home, it will be looked as he would have been working in Switzerland, because it was just, he was prohibited based on the government regulation, meaning that cross-border employee will be still subject to Swiss taxation throughout the whole period, even he worked in Italy. And from a social security point of view, same situation, he will be subject to Swiss social security, and there is no change in that regard. We will see then how long it will be. And the other thing is that still people tend to work rather from home as to go to work, because still, I mean, the COVID-19 pandemic is not over. And I assume, and that is my personal way of thinking, we will have a long time until that is really over, and we are back really on kind of normal times again. I hope you enjoyed and maybe have also seen something new, or just have realized you know already everything, which is fine as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your speech, for your presentation. And I also ask again to the attendants if there are any questions to forward again to Friederike. Martina advised me one of the questions in line with your last slide, one of the last slides, because we speak about immigration and COVID. Does Switzerland apply quarantine for foreigners entering the country from non-EU countries?
No.
No?
No.
Okay. Okay, very interesting. Okay. If there aren't other questions, we are going to the end. And I thank you again, Friederike, for your speech, for your presentation. It has been a very great occasion for us to improve our understanding of Switzerland. We have been discovering over the years as your country is a very complex country where the mix between immigration, tax, particularly, are very hard matter to manage, and companies need to be updated continually in this sense. So your presence today was very precious for us, and I thank you again. I hope to re-see you early, also in presence, live, if we'll be present, if it be possible. And thank you again, and goodbye to the attendants, and see you early. So. Okay, bye.
Thank you very much. And
bye
have
bye.
a great day.
Arrivederci a tutti, buona giornata.
Grazie, arrivederci.
Bye. Bye.